Hello and welcome to History's a Blast. This is part 4 of the Western History vlog made during our extended camping trip out west last May. On May 19th and 20th we visited Little Bighorn National Monument and the related state historical site, Rosebud Creek Battlefield Historic Site, and on the 20th we drove out and south of Sheridan to the Fort Phil Kearny State Historical Site in Wyoming. They were windy, cold days. The temperatures were just above freezing, and that's without the 30-mile-an-hour winds. I apologize in advance for that, the sound and the wind and interference. But travel along with us for the next 15 minutes, and I hope you enjoy the show. Okay, we are at the Little Bighorn National Memorial, and we are looking from the position known as Reno's defense, which is where Major Reno, the second in command of the 2nd Cavalry, with his detachment, retreated across the river, and you can see the river down there. That's the Little Bighorn River. Reno was ordered to take his detachment and charge the village. And he would have charged across that flat area on the other side of the river and into those cottonwood trees to strike the end of the village, which was just around that bluff. The number of warriors coming out of the village forced him to halt, or caused him to halt, and form a skirmish line, and they fought in those trees down there and eventually were forced to retreat across the river and up through this ravine to the hilltop that we're on now. And you just get an idea of the vastness of this battlefield. We're probably 4 or 5 miles from the visitor center, which is where the so-called Last Stand Hill is. We've been walking around the perimeter of the Reno defensive position, which was held during the afternoon of and night of the 25th and into the 26th all day, and overnight into the 27th when they were finally relieved. And I'm just panning around and going to do a 360 of the extent of the position that Reno and Benteen held with basically 300 men or fewer. And you get an idea of the scope of the battlefields and the terrain of the Indian Wars on the northern plains. We're just right there in the upper left-hand corner where I paused is the Reno Monument, looking down into the ravine up which he's retreated from the Indians chasing him out of the village. There you go. That's a 360 sweep of the Reno defense. Point note is Sharpshooter's Ridge, from which a group of Indians were able to actually fire down into Reno's defensive position until they were driven off by gunfire from a trooper with a long-range rifle. We're looking down Water Carrier's Ravine toward the river from inside Reno's defensive position. And because water was running low on the second day, they were up here for 2 days. The 25th, of course, was the day of the battle, and then overnight, and then all day the 26th and into the night of the 26th before they were relieved by the relief column coming in from the southeast. But volunteers went down into that ravine literally through the Indian lines, and got water for the wounded because the water was running out up here. And all of them, there were 6 or 7 who won the congressional, or awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Man, that's quite a feat. This is Medicine Tail Ford, where the first contact between Custer's detachment and the Indians in the village took place. The village was just across the river in that field where the red barn is. I'm on Battle Ridge now, looking back toward one of the troop defensive positions. We're on Calhoun Hill, which is the troop commanded by Calhoun. See grave markers in the foreground. And looking over toward Last Stand Hill in the distance there. Maybe you can make out in the distance the small white dots marking various gravestones of the troopers. Troopers that were left from these other troops as these became overrun were running basically to get to that hill, and were shot down as they were fleeing. There's George Custer's grave, just 6 feet above him and behind him was his brother Tom, Captain Tom Custer's grave. And looking down from the hill to Deep Ravine. This view is really a good view of Last Stand Hill from the perspective of the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors closing in on the last survivors behind their barricade of dead horses on the hill. Looking up from Deep Ravine, up toward the top of Battle Ridge, toward the Custer Monument. Along Battle Ridge, and down Deep Ravine, last retreat of the last survivors of the 260 some men who were with Custer who died. In very recent years, headstones memorializing Sioux and Cheyenne warriors who died here have begun to be placed on the battlefield. This one is to Wasichu Sapa, black-white man who was a Miniconjou Lakota who was mortally wounded here. A second memorial here on Last Stand Hill has been constructed to memorialize all of the Native Americans who lost their lives here, including the Crow, Arikara, Sioux, Cheyenne, who fought on both sides. Well, if you've been to Little Bighorn battlefield, and who hasn't, you need to come to this little state park, Rosebud Battlefield State Park, about 35 miles southeast of Little Bighorn, where General Crooks' Wyoming column was met in battle by a roughly equal number of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, Crazy Horse among them, 8 days prior on June the 17th, 1876. The outcome of the battle, as far as tactics was concerned, was a stalemate. The Indians withdrew at the end of the fight, leaving the field in the possession of the American column, of the white soldiers. But because his ammunition and other supplies had been so depleted during the fight, Crook decided to withdraw back to his base camp in Sheridan, Wyoming, about 30 miles southwest of us, and thus was not available on June the 25th when Custer met his fate. This is a wonderful little park that is just under development with limited funds, but it's worth a visit. It costs $6 entry fee, and it's definitely worth a visit. and we're going to drive around the driving trail loop and make some video footage from Crooks Hill, which is up to our left front in that general direction. This is the site of the critical Battle of Rosebud Creek, where a band of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors with Crazy Horse among them attacked the main column coming out of Wyoming, commanded by General George Crook, on May the 17th, 8 days before the Battle of Little Bighorn, about 30 miles to our northwest. We're looking down in what's called the Basin, which is the area through which the initial Indian attack charged against the combined cavalry and infantry line of General Crook. I'm standing on Crooks Hill, the commanding position that was occupied by General Crook's headquarters following the withdrawal of the Indians later in the day. Another windy day, very windy day here in the Old West. We're in Wyoming at the Fort Kearny State Historical Site. There's the Reconstructed Fort. This was the site of the several important fights with Sioux and Cheyenne along the Bozeman Trail. This monument was erected by the Civilian Conservation Corps. A lot of CCC projects here. In fact, there's a cabin, little cabin left over from the CCC project in the original reconstruction of the stockade back at Fort Kearny. The soldiers sent to relieve the woodcutting party occupied wagon boxes that had been put in a corral formation, I guess so that they could have a place to corral their mules for the wagons that hauled away the wood that they were cutting. One key difference in this fight with the infantry against the Indians from the previous December was that in the interim, the infantry at Fort Kearny had been armed with new breech-loading rifles, which increased their rate of fire and made it more accurate. And so, rather than being overwhelmed by the Indians, they were able to fight them off. And the Indians actually suffered more casualties than the soldiers did and were driven off. But here the perimeter is marked by these red and blue poles and bars. And there's a wagon box that shows you, sort of give you a perspective of how big they were that they could hide behind. Well, that brings us to an end our 2 days in the Indian War territory. After Fort Kearny, we took off for Deadwood, South Dakota. And I hope you'll join us for our last episode in the snowstorm at Deadwood, South Dakota on May the 21st and 22nd, 2019. Thanks for watching. Please click the thumbs up icon to like the video and share with your friends via email or social media. I'd love to have you subscribe, and if you do, please click the little bell icon so you'll get notifications whenever I post a new video. Goodbye.